Good morning, colleagues. I would like to, well, for those who can't see me, I'm Eva Müller. I'm the director of the division and also the ad interim leader of the Forest Technical Network. And I would like to welcome you all to this webinar on JEF 7 implementation and an update on the agency status for the impact programs. I think this has been all anxiously awaited by many of us, and so we have quite a number of people in the room. We had to change rooms because this was originally foreseen for the forestry meeting room, and we thought that would be too small. We also have some colleagues from the decentralized offices connected through audio only because, excuse me? Also video, okay, good. So they can see us, but we cannot see them. And we're also recording this session because this is part of a series of webinars of the Forestry Technical Network. And we want to give the opportunity to hear what Jeff Griffith has to say, also to those who cannot make it today. So this will be made available later, and you will also be able to listen to it again if there's something that you may have missed or may wish to recall. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our guest speaker, Jeff Griffith, who is the senior coordinator of the JEF unit in FAO and has been since 2014. I think many of you know him already and had something to do with him in one way or the other. And I hope you have some fresh news for us and some new information on the JEF 7. So please, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Eva. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, everyone here in the room, and good afternoon or good very early morning to colleagues around the world, whoever's joining with us. I see people from Asia, and maybe there are even some folks who've gotten up very early in Latin America. I have 35 slides for you today, so brace yourselves. Sorry, but I'll go through them as fast as I can. We'll start with an overview of the JEF. I thought this was such a big audience, it's worth looking at our FAO JEF portfolio quickly. And then we'll look at the programming for JEF 7. I'll go quickly through that as well, but just to emphasize, focus in on the impact programs and also some of the other key entry points for FAO and JEF 7. And then I'll talk about a little bit about what we've been doing recently or in the past year to prepare for the JEF and how the JEF's own planning is sort of catching up with what we've been doing and other agencies have been doing as well. So, I mean, overall, of course, there's a very positive outlook for FAO JEF cooperation under JEF 7. As you all know, the $4 billion program was approved in June, and the program itself is more aligned than ever before with FAO's comparative advantages. Agriculture, or the concern for unsustainable agriculture, ripples through the JEF 7 program. It's also more programmatic than ever before, and that allows us and encourages us to be more programmatic ourselves in how we approach the JEF 7. And those two pictures you see there are my poor attempt to show. I often liken our current portfolio of projects in FAO JEF to a field of wildflowers. So that's the left picture. And on the right is what we're aiming to have under JEF 7 is more of a well-tended garden. Yeah? There's nothing wrong with wildflowers. They're all beautiful, and they're healthy and strong and in their right place, and that's what our current project portfolio is, but they've sprung up, You have an idea over there, or someone else has an idea here. We do this, we've always done the review to make sure they're relevant to FAO, but we've never really taken a clear programmatic approach in certain priority areas for FAO that support or enable us to provide better technical support and other support across the board to our portfolio. And I think that's more important than ever as our project portfolio grows and FAO's bigger body of work grows as well, because we only have so many technical officers to provide support to these projects, and that's a key selling point for FAO to work with countries and the JEF on these things. So we're moving from a field of wildflowers to a more programmatic, well-tended garden. There's new life for the LDCF and SCCF, the adaptation trust funds that are managed by the GEF, and we'll talk about that a bit more later. The GEF that we all discuss mostly is one trust fund that the GEF manages. It's the biggest one, but they manage others. And the adaptation funds have been moribund, dead in the water for a year and a half, 2 years because of the Green Climate Fund, and now the donors are putting more money back in, and we'll talk about that. We have more proactive outreach and communication in our FAO-GEF work. We had an excellent showing at the Assembly in June. We've got a new publication. We have a new FAO-GEF website. So really trying to be more forward-leaning on our communication. And we can see emerging synergies between our GEF and our GCF work as well. So quickly, we've been working with the GEF since 1992. In 2000, we became direct access agency for one of GEF's focal areas, the chemicals focal area. And in 2006, we got access to all of the GEF programs. We became a full-fledged GEF agency. And you can see what happened then. Our portfolio grew dramatically, starting in about 2011. And it's been on a really steady climb. In fact, I think we probably grew too quickly in GEF 6, or GEF 5 rather. We spent the first year of GEF 6 catching up with ourselves. We had a lot of late projects that we had to submit to the GEF beyond their 18-month deadline. That was a common problem across the GEF, not just with FAO, but so anyway, we're looking now, we're aiming for a healthy growth in our portfolio, not too fast and not too slow. This is our portfolio breakdown by regions. You can see here that Asia has the biggest share of our GEF projects, followed by Africa and Latin America. We have a healthy global portfolio, and some of the smaller regions have been growing quite a bit recently. They're at 7% and 6%, but that's up quite a bit from before, from earlier. And total portfolio value now is about $750 million. Again, these are the different trust funds that are managed by the GEF. You can see the main one, of course, is the GEF Trust Fund, and that's 76% of our portfolio, but 24% is with the other trust funds of the GEF. The LDCF and SCCF are adaptation funds. That's Least Developed Countries Fund and Special Climate Change Fund. The SCCF is for non-LDCs, essentially. And CBIT, which many of you in the room know well, forestry has been a key driver of that. That's a new trust fund the GEF Council created just a year and a half ago. And we were one of the biggest movers in that in the GEF partnership, and we have now $15 million worth of projects in that. And they're small projects, but I think they're quite strategic and they fit well with what FAO does. In fact, we just submitted recently a global project. Yes? Oh, sorry. CBIT is the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency. It's focused on helping increase capacity of countries to meet the spirit of the Paris Agreement for increased transparency. You know, transparency is the fundamental aspect of the Paris Agreement, and so the donors asked the GEF to create this trust fund to build capacity. And FAO's role in that is building AFOLU capacity for transparency in countries reporting related to AFOLU matters. Okay, this is just there's a lot of information on this slide. The main point I'd like to make with this slide is that our portfolio is maturing. It's still quite young though. You can see at the very bottom of that table, we've only got 6% of our projects are closed or completed, whereas 67% or 63 are operationally active. So it takes a long time for these projects to move through their project life cycle, 7 to 8 years from idea to completion. And we've only been a full-fledged agency really growing fast for about 10 years. So you can see that, you can imagine what that means for our portfolio as well. We have a lot more evaluations coming as these projects approach their conclusion. And also we can learn lessons and do lots of interesting things in that respect with our portfolio going forward. This is a breakdown by the focal areas, and I wanted to highlight here for this audience, well, first you can see for yourself, climate change adaptation is 23%, and the rest of the breakdown, we're involved across the GEF programming areas, biodiversity, land degradation, chemicals, international waters. And then that multifocal area is a healthy almost 45% of the portfolio. And that's, I think, a key message running through this presentation, is that we're really about, the GEF is more integrated than ever. It's been going in that direction. And already 45% of our portfolio is integrated in terms of it's addressing not only biodiversity or climate change, but is doing both of those at once. And in the past with the GEF, the SFM incentive mechanism has been triggered whenever you combine two or more focal areas of the GEF. So the Sustainable Forest Management incentive mechanism was triggered, and half of our multifocal area projects are SFM projects. So they're dealing with sustainable forest management. Does this appear? Okay, so this is just a mapping of those SFM projects. You can see where we're working on sustainable forest management through these multifocal area projects worldwide. And this is linked to GEF 7 as well, but this is our current portfolio. India is darker because it's it's our largest GEF project, and it has a healthy SFM component to it. But we have sustainable forest management projects in all those other countries: China, Mongolia, Latin America, Congo, and several other countries in Africa. Okay, so let's just get to the GEF 7 programming. Some of you have seen this already. I didn't know how many of you had, so I wanted to just show this to you briefly. These are the 5 focal areas of the GEF, of GEF. They've been like that for quite a long time. Those bullet points are the main programming priorities or programs under those focal areas. And you can see there are many areas that are relevant to FAO and to forestry, particularly, of course, in biodiversity, CBIT in climate change, land degradation, some international waters, if we count mangroves. But the most interesting part about the GEF 7 are these cross-cutting impact programs that we'll talk more about now going through the rest of this presentation. Food systems, land use, and restoration is the big one, that first one. And these are, you could think of them as pre-fee menus rather than a la carte. So the above part on the GEF, on this table, those focal areas are the a la carte menu for GEF 7. We can do a mainstreaming biodiversity project, or an agrobiodiversity project, or a CBIT project. The impact programs are what's integrated about GEF 7, and they require any project that's taking part in an impact program to address 2 or more of those focal areas through a predefined impact program directions. And so we have food systems, land use, and restoration. We have SFM and sustainable cities. Now there will be lead agencies for each one of these impact programs, and FAO has been making the case to be considered as lead agency for 2 of them: sustainable food systems, land use and restoration, and SFM drylands is the biggest part of the SFM aspect for GEF 7 impact program. This is a breakdown of the GEF 7 focal areas by funding. You can see the biodiversity there is the biggest one. The others were cut quite a bit. Climate change used to be the same amount as biodiversity and all the other GEF replenishments. The GEF cut climate change quite a bit in response to the GCF. They're still funding it, but it's much lower than it used to be. Land degradation and the other focal areas, I think, were slightly increased over GEF 6. And then the table on the right shows you the impact programs. Food systems is the biggest one at 430 million. Followed by the SFM window, which is broken into 3 geographic areas of focus: Amazon, Congo, and drylands. And you can see there the figures in the parentheses are the value, the global project or global programming that the GEF will make available for the lead agency to help to program for each one of those impact programs. These are the key entry points out of that GEF program for FAO as we see it. These are some of the key ones, of course, that are relevant to forestry. All 3 of those impact programs. Sustainable cities is will almost certainly be led by the World Bank because they led the Jeff 6 program. We can see entry points, not big ones, but some interesting ones for urban food systems and possibly urban forestry as part of that. And then, of course, SFM and food systems, we'll talk more about the forestry element, particularly in food systems. Mainstreaming biodiversity. Biodiversity is a big, as you saw, has a lot of funding in Jeff 7. So there's a chance to have we can think about programming just in the biodiversity window for Jeff 7, where we might be mainstreaming biodiversity into forest management, for example. That's what that window of the Jeff programming is all about, is mainstreaming biodiversity into productive sectors. And then you can see CBIT and, of course, the blue economy aspect as it relates to forestry. Our first priority, what we've been spending a lot of time on in this first year of Jeff 7 are these impact programs, because it's really, the Jeff is very much focused on that itself. And so we have been focusing our efforts to position FAO to play lead roles in those two impact programs. First, the food systems one, where actually we met in Washington 2 weeks ago now, and the Jeff asked each agency to present on its comparative advantages to be lead agency for these impact programs. We presented for food systems and for drylands. This is just one of the slides we presented on food systems that covers FAO's comparative advantage vis-a-vis our convening powers and access to decision makers. The Jeff wants to know from the agencies who want to be lead agencies, they want to know what are your comparative advantages, and then the follow-up question from them was how will you deploy those to support the program? So FAO has all this immense convening power, which is quite impressive. We actually had to create this figure because we couldn't find one that showed everything on one slide that we could communicate to the Jeff or another donor. So we actually spent a lot of time preparing this and also other aspects of our comparative advantages related to our knowledge and innovation strengths, related to our ability to leverage financing, engage the private sector, related to our ability to access and work with local decision makers and regional decision makers. And I believe those were the main areas that we presented on. But this is just one of the slides. I didn't include all of them here, but we gave the presentation was very well received in DC. I think if the agencies had a chance to vote at that time, FAO would have been chosen overwhelmingly to lead this food systems impact program. But unfortunately, we have a small organization called the World Bank that's competing with us for this impact program. And they happen to be right next door to the Jeff. And so we'll see, but we have tough competition. Either way, we will play a significant role in this impact program at the global level and, of course, at the national level. Let me just talk about the Food Systems Impact Program now. From the Jeff's perspective, of course, they're looking at food systems because they are unsustainable and they're a key driver for environmental degradation worldwide. This is just a slide actually from one of my Jeff colleagues' presentations highlighting the emissions, the climate change impacts of unsustainable systems. So they want to see their systems projects addressing these kind of emissions from unsustainable agriculture. And of course, these are all areas that FAO is highly expert in addressing, and as are all of you. The causes of deforestation, these are also underlying rationale for Jeff's work in this: agriculture, commercial and subsistence, and the growing demand for these products will increase that pressure on the environment and on forests. This is the vision of this Food Systems Impact Program. They want to go from unsustainable landscapes, unsustainable food systems that create these kinds of landscapes and land degradation and environmental externalities, to one that's a more harmonized landscape planning approach. You could call it an agroecology kind of an approach. But basically, the emphasis of this impact program is first on landscapes. They want each project to choose a specific landscape, organize landscape planning, and deal with multiple different objectives within the landscape. One of them involves forests, but it's not just forests. It would be then crops or commodities, and of course the value chains associated with those. So this is an example of what they're looking for in this impact program. Spatially explicit geographies where these different aspects are integrated, and they have actually criteria for choosing these landscapes that'll have to be in every project that'll be funded under that $430 million impact program. Ultimately, the GEF wants a diversified portfolio of these country projects. They want landscapes that are production landscapes that are still healthy with good environmental benefits, but where remaining forest is threatened. They want landscapes where production of globally important food crops or livestock creates environmental problems, environmental externalities. They're looking for frontier landscapes where on the edge of productive work, where they want to prevent further expansion of agriculture and commodity production into healthy forests. And they want landscapes that are highly degraded, that are in need of restoration. So this is the kind of thing they're looking for, and they'll be looking for when they review these impact program child projects. Now, these are the criteria for the impact program projects. We've been talking about this for some time. Whoops. The high potential to generate environmental values, the project's contribution to wider national or subnational strategies, public sector support, political will, private sector involvement. There are a lot of elements here that they'll be looking for and they'll be requiring in these projects. And this is, I would say, much more, the GEF has ramped up these kinds of requirements in GEF 7 compared to previous phases. And we've been, by the way, working on ideas, which I'll summarize in a bit, that meet these criteria. We've been, of course, thinking about this for some time, collectively in FAO. This is an example of what they're looking for and the potential actions that it would fund under this food systems. So, for example, improving yield, they want projects that improve yields and decrease land use requirements in agricultural areas, that support forest restoration and rehabilitation of land, that improve capacity of smallholder farmers, conserve agrobiodiversity, and of course then convening, engaging stakeholders, improving policies, and bringing in the value chains in new and innovative ways to support sustainable agriculture. Okay, so let's go to the SFM Sustainable Forest Management part of the GEF 7 program, and these are the three sub-impact programs, you could say. Amazon will very likely be led by the World Bank. Congo Basin, they're not certain yet. There were about 3 or 4 agencies competing for that, including the World Bank, but also UNEP and IUCN and I think CI. And then dryland forests, we are competing with IUCN in terms of being considered for lead agency for that impact program. There are 3 geographic sub-areas of foci for this, for the dryland forest impact program. You can see them at the bottom of the slide here. There's the overall objective of sustainable dryland sustainable landscapes, the kinds of key interventions that they'll support as they relate to key outcomes. And we've been working for quite some time already in the Miombo area for Southern Africa. In Central Asia, we're working to build on work we have there already. And in Latin America, we're beginning to discuss with potential partners projects there. This is just an example of what we did in the Miombo region to build the groundwork for a robust portfolio there under this SFM window. Even before we even knew that, the GEF even knew that this what the SFM window would cover. In fact, you can see there, this kind of work that was done by our colleagues across the House resulted in, we have concept note, of course, from Miombo, a publication, and then finally the GEF. I think it helped to influence the GEF in deciding to include Miombo as one of their sub-areas of foci for SFM drylands. So we'll be using that, and we already are using that as concept note in the region to get countries to sign up for these, to agree to work with FAO to develop expressions of interest in projects under this impact program. This is the timeline for this first year of GEF 7. I didn't know it wasn't going to all come up at once. Let me see. Okay, there we go. You can see the GEF assembly on the far left. The main message is this first year, again, from the GEF's perspective, is very much focused on impact programs. There'll be the first GEF Council of GEF 7 is there in the middle of the slide. You can see December 2018. That work program, the GEF tells us, will be quite small, and that really the first bulk funding for GEF 7 will come next June, when these impact programs will be approved in terms of their programming documents. Before that happens, the GEF needs to decide first on the lead agency question. We were hoping they would decide that 2 weeks ago at the meeting in Washington. However, they listened to all of our presentations and they said, well, you're all qualified to lead these impact programs. And then they thought quickly and came back and said, why don't you write us, each of you write us a 4-page proposal as to how you would address these certain questions if you're chosen as lead agency. And that's what we spent all last week doing and submitted those on Friday to the GEF. They say now they'll make this decision by October 19th. By October 30th, they'll release a call for proposals, a call for expressions of interest worldwide to countries to prepare for, or to prepare expressions of interest to be submitted to the GEF for the lead agency and the GEF to review. They'll have the countries you can see there in the middle of this timeline. They'll have from the 30th of October to approximately the end of January to prepare these. In February, the GEF Secretariat with the lead agency will evaluate these EOI and decide what will be included in each impact program in the first batch. This won't be the only opportunity. Countries can still engage in the impact programs in the future at councils of GEF 7, but this will be the first one and probably the biggest one. At the same time, whoever is chosen as lead agency will need to get working on these program framework documents, because the GEF 7 program has a description of these impact programs, but it's quite general. And a more specific, you could think of it as a project document, but they call it a program framework document. A more specific program framework document will have to be written to serve as the umbrella program globally for food systems and for sustainable dry lands as well, for each one of those impact programs. And that will have to be done at the same time countries are writing these expressions of interest, which is an unfortunate. It's unfortunate that we don't have the PFD first and then the countries write the EOIs to match what the PFD has written, but the GEF organized this in a way that doesn't allow that, so we'll have a parallel process there. And then in April next year, whoever is chosen as each lead agency will have to submit these program framework documents for the first council in June to be approved with funding triggered. And then the preparation of each one of those projects begins in July, to be submitted 12 to 18 months after that. So you can see how the timeline reaches quickly to the middle to the end of GEF 7, even for this first batch of impact program projects. Let's see, did I miss anything here? And we have been also thinking, of course, internally, what would we need to do if we are chosen as lead agency? There are certain steps that we would need to take almost immediately in terms of creating a technical advisory group to begin thinking about how to help countries prepare the highest quality EOI, and in particular, how to help improve the selected expressions of interest early next year that will be included in the program framework document. We'd have to form a steering committee of agencies and other actors who would be part of this impact program. We have a whole timeline and are creating a budget for that as we speak. So that is the summary of those impact programs. We'll hopefully know, the Jeff tells us we'll know more by October 19th. They'll make a decision on each one of these impact programs, and we expect to be playing, regardless of that decision, be playing key lead roles at the global level in those two impact programs, and then of course working with countries to develop child projects, they call them, worldwide under those impact programs and others. These are Jeff 7, this is just other Jeff 7 focal area programming details. So leaving the impact programs and just reviewing quickly the opportunities under the focal areas themselves. Because remember, the impact programs are about $800 million out of the $4 billion of Jeff 7. So you can think of it in another way. There's about 2.5 billion of the 4 billion is allocated to the countries. So all the impact program money will come from country allocations. So in that respect, it's a 1/3 of country allocations will be channeled through these impact programs. So it's quite a lot. But still, there's a lot of funding in Jeff 7 outside of those impact programs in the focal areas, in particular for FAO, biodiversity, international waters, and it looks like the Jeff will allow us to integrate, do our traditional integrated AFOLU work as well with climate change and land degradation. This is just the biodiversity objectives you can see here. The entry points, mainstreaming into priority sectors will be a key one. We can envision a program on this in forestry, if there's demand for that among the countries. Inclusive conservation, natural capital assessment and accounting. I don't know if invasive and alien species, we haven't done much on that, but there's a potential for that. Coastal marine protected areas, vis-a-vis mangroves. Climate change, most of the AFOLU work in climate change is pushed into the impact programs. CBIT, as I mentioned before, is definitely an opportunity here. And finally, the LDCF and the SCCF. There's a new program, there's a new strategies for each one of those that's been prepared and endorsed by the Jeff Trust Fund. The interesting thing here is there's actually money coming. The donors have approved this strategy with this mention of $750 million to $1 billion being put into these two trust funds. And now, for those of you who are familiar with it, with how the LDCF and SCCF used to work, they operated largely separately because they were approved, those projects were approved on a rolling basis, and countries just contributed money whenever they had any spare cash, they would put it into the LDCF. So it was very hard to predict and manage and coordinate with other Jeff work because the other Jeff work was moving on a very well-regulated schedule. The change now is that the Jeff is requiring integration of these climate change funds, adaptation funds, with the regular trust funds. So new adaptation projects under Jeff 7 they'll be strongly encouraging integration with Jeff Trust Fund work. So climate change adaptation integrated with climate change mitigation, biodiversity, land degradation, and even the impact programs. Projects will be approved via work programs, not on a rolling basis. So there'll be no line of projects that are being funded on a, as the funding comes in. It'll be just like the Jeff manages its own trust fund. They will decide, the Jeff CEO will decide what adaptation projects will be brought forward to council for funding at each council meeting. And that way the Jeff says they can, and they're right, they can facilitate further integration. They can choose projects that are more integrated and better complement what they're funding in their other trust funds. So this is, I think, overall good for FAO. It's something that comes naturally to what we do with the Jeff. Also with LDCF, the country ceiling has been raised to 50 million from 40 million, with a cap of 10 million initially per country. Each country will not be allowed to access more than 10 million of new LDCF money going forward. And they'll be revisiting that in the future, but that's the link for now. And as a result of this kind of integration, we can begin to see more potential for Jeff and GCF synergies with this integration of climate change adaptation and mitigation in the Jeff. Now, with respect to our approach to Jeff 7 planning, These are some key sort of, you could say, principles or actions we've been taking. First, we've been engaging with the GEF at the global level to secure key roles for FAO in those impact programs. We've been advancing discussions with key co-financing partners, since that's such an important aspect of our work under GEF 7. With EFOD globally, with a particular focus on Africa, and that has been, those discussions have been well underway, and in fact EFOD is a co-sponsor of our lead agency proposal for food systems we submitted last week. So we're very much engaged with them, and we look forward to working with them regardless of the lead agency question, working with them in Africa on food systems programming. CAF in Latin America, the Latin American Development Bank, we've had very good meetings with them, and we hope to prepare to develop a portfolio of projects where we're working together, building on CAF financing with FAO's technical expertise. EBRD in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and Near East. We've had ongoing discussions with them, and in fact we'll be meeting with them tomorrow again. And it's looking promising to have a program with them as well in those regions. And ADB in Asia, they are open to working with FAO, and in fact they're a key partner with us in the Bay of Bengal, the large project, the International Waters Project that was approved just in June, and we hope to integrate them further into our food systems work in Asia. Also, we've been working, of course, to build upon what we're doing already to develop these GEF 7 programs. And I'll talk about that a bit in the next slide, but the Mediterranean forest work, the Miombo work, etc. We've been taking a bottom-up planning approach wherever possible, putting the regional and sub-regional offices in the lead, and it's very heartening to see the strengthened capacity vis-a-vis 4 years ago, the strengthened capacity of our regional offices and sub-regional offices related to GEF. We provide the support, assistance, information, consultant help to develop programs and projects here at headquarters. But we'd ideally like that to be driven from the regional and sub-regional levels. And for now, we've been focusing on the impact program, but as I said, the impact programs, but much room for single focal area projects going forward that are also blended with the adaptation funding of the GEF. These are just some examples of the key initiatives and programs we've been working on. As I mentioned before, the Miombo SFM drylands work with different partners, EFOD, the World Bank, and others. Food systems in sub-Saharan Africa with EFOD. The Mediterranean forests work that we're building on, FAO's long-standing engagement there. We've had to shift how we're dealing with that in GEF 7. Now it looks like there'll be a food systems program there. SFM drylands in Central Asia, building on our Kasilm work there. A possible wheat/livestock landscapes program in Central Asia with EBRD. A rice landscapes program in the works in Asia with UNEP, IRRI, WBCSD, and other partners. These are all work that's been ongoing for many months now, involving many of you in the room and many of you on the video. Source to Sea in Asia, that's lining up several countries for what could be a program under GEF 7, but certainly will be projects and will be replicable in other parts of the world. We're looking at SIDS program of one sort or another. We'd like to shine a spotlight on SIDS in GEF 7, building on the gap. We initially hoped that would be a food systems program, but it looks like SIDS may not qualify for food systems, given all the requirements of that program. They may not be big enough, may not have enough impact for the GEF. So we'll instead work with them on an integrated program in each one of those sub-regions that instead of bringing in impact program money, integrates LDCF and SECF funds for an interesting integrated approach in each one of those sub-regions. Of course, CBIT we're working to develop a robust CBIT portfolio. There'll be about $50 million available for CBIT under GEF 7, and we think if FAO can access 15 to 20 million of that out of the 18 agencies, that would be quite a success. And then, of course, we're working on big ideas in the big BRIC countries food systems concepts, for example, in India, China, and Brazil. My parting message is that the future is integrated. This is just a simple timeline you can see on the lower part of the screen. The first 15 years of the GEF, from 1993 to 2009, there were no integrated projects. They were just biodiversity, climate change, and LD silo kind of projects. The middle part of GEF, the first multifocal area project was written in about 2010, 2011. Since then, the SFM mechanism was invented and put into place, catalyzing further integration in GEF's work, and you can see what it did to our portfolio. Now we have 45% of our projects are integrated, and now the GEF 7 is more and more integrated than ever, with 30% being plowed into the impact programs and integration further with climate change adaptation. So what does this mean for FAO's engagement with the GEF? I think it's an important question that we ask ourselves and answer. It has implications for how we perform as a GEF agency, how we deliver services to countries. Does it mean that we can have our standard lead technical officer role in FAO? Or does it mean we need a broader approach where we can bring in multiple LTOs for one project? The India project that I mentioned before is a $35 million project that's working on a wide range of technical issues. We can't have one LTO for that project. We need 8. And we need to set up a system for that. And so that's my parting question, thought for you all. Thank you for your attention. I encourage you to check out our new website. You can find all the projects in FAO's portfolio there on a global map with all the background information for each one. And you can find the programming directions there at the web link. And feel free to contact us in the GEF unit for any further questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, for this very, very, very informative presentation. And of course, the presentation will be made available as well, because there were so many details in there that maybe not everybody will be able to remember them off the bat like this. I'm sure there are many questions from our colleagues, and I think what we should do is, Daowei maybe can help me establish a list of people who want to ask questions, starting with our decentralized officers. So who from the decentralized officers has a question that you would like to ask? Nobody? Did you hear us? Do you hear me? Okay, let me repeat the question. Is there anybody from the decentralized offices who would like to ask Jeff a question?
No, from Asia we are okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, then let's go to the room here. Mette? On that side? Ciao? Any more here? Chiroma. Sorry. On the other side? Andrew? Who else? Nobody? Okay, let's start with those. So, Mette, you were first.
Thank you, and apologies for coming in late. I and a couple of other colleagues were waiting for all of you to arrive in the forestry meeting room until we found out that we were late. We were there early. Anyway, firstly, a huge thank you to your team for the immense work over the last couple of weeks to try and put forward FAO's bid for the 2 impact programs. It has been fantastic to work with that whole team and see what we could pull together in a very short time. And also to all of those that we sort of reached out to in the department and outside. at very short notice to get input for that. So I think that was a fantastic team effort, and fingers crossed that it actually bears fruit. But as you say, whatever happens on those, we will have a very strong portfolio under each of them, and a good impact on the ground, hopefully, as well. I think one of the things, now we've heard about the GEF program and the framework and all of that, and for some people here, they're quite familiar with GEF because they worked with it before, but we also have quite a lot of new staff in the forestry department. And I think it would be useful if you could tell us a little bit about the role of the GEF unit versus the department. What is an LTO? How does it work? What is actually in it for those that have to do the work in the technical department? So when we have either direct execution or others, a little bit about the GEF fees, perhaps. Say, okay, well, where's the carrot for actually us being involved in this, other than the extra work and the impact on the ground? Is it going to be just extra work, or is there something else that can help us at least find somebody else to help us out with it? So what is the role of the unit? If anybody has a great idea in this room, and I'm sure that a lot of people are already thinking, what are the next steps? So a little bit more about how that works, and also how it works with the region and the regional offices. It's a big question, I know, but let's take a couple of, yeah, we could also take another, you take that one, but it's a lot of things. Sorry, yeah.
Okay, you know, we could have a whole week of meetings on this, because it you know, that's a big question. Basically, and a very important one. Is everyone familiar with FAO's project cycle and the roles and responsibilities in FAO's project cycle? I'm sure new folks may not be, but others certainly are, the veterans in the room. Our GEF work follows that for the most part. You know, there are 3 key roles in the project cycle in FAO: the budget holder, which holds the reins of the project budget, and by FAO policy, that is the most decentralized office possible. So most of our projects, the budget holder is the FAO rep in country, or for regional projects, it's the FAO regional office, and for global projects, it's headquarters. That has changed over, you know, especially with the arrival of our current DG. I think that was made more of a priority to decentralize that work. I know that the Forest Department and other headquarters departments had quite a legacy portfolio of GEF projects as well that allowed you to, I think I checked on your fees, Forest has earned about $2 million in GEF fees over the course of our involvement with the GEF. And so that, I think that's probably gone down in recent years as those funds were pushed out to the regional offices and country offices. So there's the budget holder. There's also the lead technical officer, of course, which many of you are. You serve that role on GEF projects still, but even that role is also now pushed to the regional offices as much as is possible. It varies by region and the capacity of regional offices to handle that. But most of our LTOs, I think, are coming now from regional offices. And then there's the FLOW, the Funding Liaison Officer role, and that's us. That's the GEF unit. I think we in the GEF unit play a different role than you could say, the normal flow in FAO. The people, we don't handle, of course, the European Union projects and all the other projects FAO has. Those flows are in TCR. Is that still the same acronym? TCR. And for the GEF, what we do is we combine that traditional flow where we manage the process, the FPMIS, the project approvals and monitoring. But we also, the people in the GEF unit have been hired for their knowledge of the GEF and their ability to connect the dots, I would say, to see the bigger picture and be able to communicate and understand how to present projects to the GEF that make sense in the way that GEF wants them presented. And so we also then play a role in helping to improve and refine the quality of projects that are submitted to the GEF over time from that GEF perspective. Of course, it varies with the technical departments. There are some technical officers who are very good at that themselves and need no assistance. There are others who really don't know the JEF and they don't have time to learn about the JEF, nor should they really be required to. They're experts in their own field, and that's fine. So we have a mixture of I would say, the specific roles that technical officers play. But LTOs are really, in the FAO project cycle, are supposed to guarantee the technical quality of a project. But that's different than the JEF design quality of a project, and that's what we in the JEF unit focus on. You can have a very well technically designed JEF project that will fall flat with the JEF because it doesn't meet their requirements. So that's how that's where we come in. Does that help? And of course, this is all very, we're getting into more details, but we have quite an elaborate system of dispersing fees around FAO. And that's something we also do in our little JEF unit. We have 2 finance people that work their fingers to the bone. We have over 100 fee accounts around FAO that we put fees into per organized schedule and per the fee guidance note that was written by us and by OSP 2 years ago now, I believe it was issued. So we have a 15-page guidance note on how JEF fees are dispersed around FAO, and according to what criteria, and what schedule, and that's how we then disperse these fees around FAO to all the country offices, to the regional offices, to the departments. And there's a fee budget holder in each one of those places for each one of those fee accounts. And I should also say that on the LTO rule, the fee guidance says clearly that even though, let's say, the LTO may be based in RAP, for example. I saw Thomas Hoffer on the list. I don't know if he's still there. Thomas, you there? Anyway, even though the LTO may be in a regional office, it's not, these fees are not entitled.
I'm here, Jeff, yes. Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. We can't consider these fees to be an entitlement. They are fee for service. So it's the LTO's job, whether it's Thomas or anyone else, to make sure the technical support is provided to that project for which they are LTO. If they can provide it, great. If they cannot, or they need more help, then it's up to them, it's incumbent upon them to bring that other technical expertise in. And the fees are fungible. The fees can be used, the fees can be shared across the organization. And that's how we're set up currently. And I was alluding to that, I guess, in my last slide, is that we need to make sure that's working well, and that system is bringing forth all of the technical expertise FAO has to offer from headquarters and the regional offices, because that's what the countries expect and that's what they deserve. So I hope that answers your question.
One more to talk a little bit, because people have heard about implementing agency and executing agency, and so the difference between the 2 roles and how that's.
Okay, yes. Okay, so in the JEF speak, there are implementing agencies and executing agencies. And we are an implementing agency. We are one of the 18 agencies of the JEF, and they call those agencies implementing agencies. And the JEF model is set up basically on the World Bank's model. So they want all of their, they don't want the implementing agency to also be the executing agency. They don't want the implementing agency to also manage the day-to-day financing of the project, to disperse the funds, to hire the consultants. That's the job of a national executing agency. That's how the JEF has always been set up. That's been their policy really since the beginning. And increasingly, they are pressuring FAO and other agencies to adhere to that policy. Still, and this is another presentation we could have, or a discussion, still most of our projects are not national execution. They are direct execution by FAO. That's our traditional model. The JEF has accepted that, sort of like, you know, the American military's don't ask, don't tell policy. That's been the JEF's policy with us on direct execution, but they've increasingly been asking and requiring us to tell. So we need to move to model to a full, our objective is to have 95% external execution of our JEF projects as soon as possible. Because otherwise the JEF will say, FAO, maybe you need to take a break from being executing a JEF agency until you can build that capacity. It's a very firm requirement of the JEF. And in fact, we were meeting with the OPIM team just a few days ago and are working on that. But that discussion then comes up. People will say, well, what's in it for FAO if we can't manage the money? To which I would say, well, since when is managing money FAO's strength? We can still, we're not talking about taking away the technical inputs of FAO. We're talking about handing over the reins for the day-to-day budget management to an external partner, preferably a national government partner, but also it could be any other external agency. FAO still keeps its role overseeing the project, still has the fees for lead technical support, and could even still supervise the recruitment of consultants. There is wiggle room in there, in that national execution space, in that NIM space, but we definitely need to move into that space, and then figure out the best FAO model in that respect.
Okay, thank you. I had Cha next.
You mentioned the country seating of 50 million and also a cap per country at 10 million. What are the differences between these two?
Sorry, what was the second part?
The cap per country at 10 million.
Of 10 million.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was only regarding the, I was speaking about the LDCF in particular, the Least Developed Countries Fund, not about the JEF overall. So remember, the JEF manages 4 trust funds. Its main trust fund, and then those other trust funds. It gets complicated, but the LDCF itself is allocated to countries, those funds. Originally, they allocated 30 million per country. That was many years ago. And then they increased it to 40 million, and now they've increased it to 50 million. So Burkina Faso may have already accessed, over the last 8 years, 30 or 40 million of LDCF money. With the increase to 50 million, they have another 10 million that they can access. Or Laos may have accessed only 20 million of LDCF money in the last 8 years. And now, with the increase to 50 million, they theoretically could go to access that additional 30 million, but the JEF put a cap of 10 per country on the LDCF funds initially, and they might increase that. But originally they're going to say, okay, each country can only access 10 million of new LDCF money, up to a total of 50 million. Does that help?
May I ask you, what is the normal size of the JEF 7 funding for one country, or the likely range of the funding size?
Okay, so I mean the JEF funds that are allocated to the countries are climate change mitigation funds, biodiversity funds, and land degradation funds. So those are all allocated to the countries through a formula called STAR, System of Transparent Allocation of Resources. And there isn't a normal level, because each country is vastly different. China will get 150 million, and Laos will get 6, depending on that formula. The size of the country, the scope of their biodiversity, the extent of their land, desertification problems, the size of their economy. There are different aspects to the formula which you can easily see online. But that's it. So you can Google JEF 7 STAR allocation, and it'll show you what those are globally. Yeah.
Okay, Shiroma's next.
This is it's about the invasive alien species, what you have mentioned as a key area. So by nature it is transboundary. So most of the JEF projects are more like country specific. So if you, because it makes sense if when you are working with invasive alien species to work in a regional or global level. But in a regional level, if you are working, I feel like likelihood of getting approval or everything is harder than country programs. So can you comment on that one, please?
Yeah. Well, the issue, regardless of whether it's invasive species or any other program area, for biodiversity, for those three focal areas that are allocated to the countries, the question of whether you can do a regional project is, well, the potential, the opportunity to do a regional project is limited because most of those funds are allocated to the countries themselves, and countries themselves, sometimes they'll agree to a regional project if there's good rationale for it, but most of the time they don't want to put their national money into a regional project. They feel like they're losing control over it and they may not benefit from it as much as just a national project. So if we have a good rationale to take a regional approach on something like that, then we can discuss it, one, with the GEF. They may have some additional money hidden away somewhere for these regional projects. I doubt they have very much because the impact programs have soaked up all that global and regional sort of discretionary money now in GEF 7. But we can certainly talk to them about it, and if countries agree to do a regional project, then that's fine. Then it's one project with country funding, and you could say country components under that one project. But the funds would come from the country's own allocation. Yeah?
Yeah, so I had a couple of questions and some confusions, I suppose. One is I've just actually come back from India and I had a meeting with Tomio Shichiri, who's struggling. They've got a major, struggling is not the right word, but a major GF project to implement, and it was clear to me that the management challenges getting up to speed are going to be a lot as that program goes forward, and I'm sure Thomas and others are aware, but I guess it's the biggest GF. So I guess figuring out how we can rise to those management challenges and really deliver was one thing that I came back with.
Sorry, which country was that?
In India.
In India.
In India. So you've got a brand new country rep and so on. The more of the questions I'm trying to understand the possibilities to do more regional, you've already talked about this, more regional and even global programs. And my understanding is that would be all under the impact path, the impact programs, right? Which is a change from the past where the bulk of the funding has gone through STAR allocation, if I understand correctly. So could you expand a little bit on how we can work on advanced global and regional initiatives?
Okay. Yeah. Well, first on your comment on India, you're right. And that's a big test for FAO. We need to deliver in India because the GEF is watching that carefully. It's a big project for the GEF as well, and we need to come together and support that project in the best way possible. Regarding regional and global projects in GEF 7, well, if you're talking about the STAR allocate, the three focal areas, the GEF has 5 focal areas.
Yes, yeah.
So chemicals and international waters are a bit easier to have these global projects, and we'll definitely be pursuing like areas beyond national jurisdiction on international waters. That'll be a global project and program. Chemicals, we may have an agriculture chemicals a global project. That's still sort of under consideration. But for the 3 focal areas, yeah, most of that money is plowed into the impact programs. In the past, the GEF has kept money out of the STAR. They haven't given it to the countries and kept it at the global level, maybe 50 million or something for global projects, for biodiversity, for climate change mitigation. I don't think they don't have that money now. It's in the impact programs. Right. Because the countries, they don't like when the GEF does that. They want the money, all of it, to go to them. So it's difficult for the GEF to, already they're taking out 160 million just for food systems out of the country STAR and keeping it at the global level and then dispersing it per the GEF's wishes for the impact programs. So that's a bit of a controversy in the GEF partnership. Countries don't necessarily like that, but the donors like it. And because the GEF goes by the golden rule, the program was approved that way. So I think, yeah, I think regional projects will be best will be largely funded under these impact programs. We can see, as you saw in that list, rice landscapes, for example, in Asia. We hope that it'll have a regional umbrella project for 5 or 6 rice landscape national projects. We hope maybe for the Mediterranean program to have a regional umbrella project, for example. Does that answer your question? Global projects are going to be, I wouldn't say impossible, but if we have some compelling ideas, we can certainly bring them up with the GEF, but I wouldn't hold out too much hope for additional global project funding under GEF 7 for the biodiversity, climate change, and land degradation.
Before we go into a second round, I have a question myself. You talked a lot about the impact programs and that FAO is trying to become a lead agency for 2 of those. So what is the actual advantage of being a lead agency? Does that somehow translate into more projects, or is it just more work? And more prestige, maybe?
Spoken by someone with a lot of experience there, yes. It's, look, the primary advantage is political, almost. I mean, we almost had to make a play to be the lead agency for food systems. We're the Food and Agriculture Organization. We would be able to control or develop this $25 million global project and convene stakeholders globally for that and help to guide how that program evolves and serves countries and draws upon our own convening power and so on. But it is a lot more work. In fact, there are some agencies like UNDP that have done this in the past that are not wanting to do it at all anymore because it's been quite a bit of work for them. Adriana Dinu of the GEF in UNDP has told me many times that we don't want to do any of those lead agency roles now. They did them in the past and they're happy to just work on the national projects. So, and I think, the benefit is controlling this global project, convening, being in that position of influence over that substantial amount of funding from member countries in areas that are of high importance to FAO. That's the benefit for being lead agency in these impact programs. And I think, frankly, countries, remember the countries have to decide which agency they're going to work with under those impact programs. And obviously some of those countries will choose the lead agency to work with over another agency given the choice. So that would help us and any lead agency get projects under that impact program. So there is an unspoken advantage there, I would think, even though we wouldn't be able to any lead agency wouldn't be able to bias too much in favor of their own projects. But still, there is that element of advantage, I would say. Yeah.
And could our trajectory of direct implementation eventually compromise our chances for becoming a lead agency? How is the World Bank doing compared to us in terms of national execution, for example?
Well, I mean, the bank, all of their work is national execution, Another interesting question, though, is, does that work? The GEF itself did an analysis of delivery, of level of delivery by all the agencies in their projects, and the banks within the GEF partnership, the World Bank and all the other banks, were the worst performers. FAO came out pretty well, actually, in that analysis. The banks were awful because they have such long delays between approval of the project and actually starting the project because of the complications and difficulties. But nevertheless, this is, the donors want this, the UN General Assembly approved it, they want this. I mean, everybody wants national execution. I think the challenge we can have, if we have a flexible mechanism in OPIM, we can have national execution that involves substantial FAO support in areas that countries need it. If it's procurement, if it's recruitment, we can negotiate that with countries and then recover costs for that. But it's still national execution. It's still that modality. It's not DEX. It's not FAO up front. It's still FAO, countries up front, FAO's providing support. You could say it's a different way of providing support to the countries. Yeah. So I don't know if that will hamper our efforts on lead agency. The GEF knows that we are still working to get this in place. That may influence their decision. I don't know. I don't think it should, because this is a global project. After all, the lead agency question is really about the global project. And there's no problem with FAO managing that directly because it's global. And the child projects at the country level is where that challenge will come. Yeah.
Thank you. So, more questions? Okay, let's start. We have Marco, we have Safia, we have Elias. Anybody else on this side? No. That side? Serena. So we start with Marco.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. My question is about dealing with the countries, right? The role of this operational focal point, and whether you have any guidance in terms of how can we facilitate this? How can we be helpful? For example, some of us as technical officers have direct access to some ministers or agencies. Obviously, the role of the FAO reps is very important, the sub-regional and regional officers, the GEF unit. What would be your advice in terms of, if we have ideas, if we know that there might be some possibility in some countries, how can we contribute most effectively? That is my first question. The second question is more a curiosity, because you said that the LTO roles are being moved progressively more towards the regions, sub-regions, and I have seen recently that in some officers they go from being the LTO of one project to being the LTO of 8, 10, 12 plus projects. From your experience, what is, a reasonable load to be an effective LTO? I don't know if there is an answer to this question, but I'm just curious of your opinion.
Okay. The first question, that's a good question. I would say if you have specific ideas, let us and the regional office focal point know, and we can, and the country office, of course. What we're trying to avoid is FAO coming from all directions at the focal point in the country. Now, the main contact point with the contact person in FAO for the focal points in each country is the FAO rep. So I guess you communicate with that person first, but keeping us in the GEF unit and the regional. Most of our regions, all of our regions have GEF focal points now, and Asia, Latin America, and I believe Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and also RNE in Cairo have specific GEF officers full-time working on GEF. We'll make available that list again in our next newsletter. We can send out a reminder to everybody. We'll be sending out an update on the guidance for these expressions of interest and the next steps and how we're going to do this in the coming week, as soon as we hear from the GEF about that. The coming 2 weeks, I would say. And then on the LTO question, I don't know what I think it varies. But again, I think from our perspective in the GEF unit, what we see is, and I didn't include it in the slide presentation, but we have a great slide where it shows, more projects coming, right, in FAO. GEF projects, GCF projects, EU projects, projects. Are the number of LTOs increasing? No. So what happens? What do we do? Because that's going to continue. The trend is more non-core budget funding and static core budget funding, and so we need this other funding, but how do we manage it? I think it means the LTOs have to move up the food chain and not provide direct technical support per se, because they can't do it for 20 projects. But then they become responsible for making sure that support's provided. They've got the money, they've got the resources through these fees and others, So they program that. They say, gosh, I don't have time to support the India project fully or this other project. And they reach out to colleagues around the organization and then book that time. And the fee resources can easily flow for TSS and other things like that. That's how we see what we see being needed. Yeah.
Thank you. Safia?
I wanted to ask about the lead agency. So once a lead agency is designated, how much do other implementing partners have opportunity to still participate? For example, in SFM, the Amazon region might be taken by the World Bank, and would there still be opportunity for FAO to develop and implement programs there?
Yes, of course there is. There are opportunities. Each area will be slightly different. Amazon, because it's a GEF 6 program already, with countries working on projects, I would imagine they've already had some discussions about GEF 7. And we spoke, some of you may have been in this room actually, 3 or 4 months ago when Mark Zimsky was here, the head of biodiversity for GEF. And he told me at that time that Amazon, most of the countries in the Amazon had already agreed on how they were going to approach GEF 7. There were still some remaining, like Bolivia, Venezuela, Suriname, and maybe Guyana. So there are opportunities, but for that particular one, FAO needs to move quickly, and we've been talking with our regional office colleagues about that, about choosing and zeroing in on a couple of entry points for Amazon. But and for sustainable cities, we've been talking with the bank about getting our urban food systems angle into that program. It wouldn't be a big area for us, but we'd like to see that it's addressed there and maybe get some sort of a global child project of $1 or $2 million to focus on urban food systems. But we do need to talk to the bank about that because they will almost be certainly the lead agency for that one as well. So no, there's definitely space for it's an open. Theoretically, it's an open participatory approach to deciding GEF 7 engagement under these impact programs. And it's up to the countries ultimately to decide which agency they want to go forward with to do an expression of interest. Remember, that's the first step under these impact programs.
Elias, next.
Thank you, Jeff, for a very informative presentation. I have two questions. The first one is, I fully understand the rationale for the national execution, but our experience in the past with the GEF projects while preparing was this fiduciary assessment and things like that. Is the GEF is also thinking to relax it a bit, or is it, what's the thinking behind that, like for national execution in terms of fiduciary standards and things? And the second thing is, we didn't mention much about the role of the LTU or the headquarters technical officers. We talked about LTO. So is it also aligned fully with this GEF project cycle? No, the FAO project cycle, or is it a bit different to GEF projects?
Okay. Well, on your last point, it's my understanding that the FAO project cycle did away with the LTU quite a while ago. It used to be, and I don't know why that was done, but it doesn't exist anymore. And maybe that's what we need is some kind of, maybe it's an LTG, lead technical group, or something like that. Okay, so I don't, that's not even on there's no fee allocation for LTU because it doesn't exist in the FAO cycle. Could you repeat your question on the execution? You were talking about fiduciary standards.
Yes. So basically, that is one of the reasons why sometimes we couldn't go with the national execution because they had to do this fiduciary assessment and things like that.
I mean, of course, yes, we have to do fiduciary assessments. Our GEF preparatory money will pay for those. The PPG will pay for that. It's not that expensive. It's, I think, $5,000. FAO has made agreements with 2 or 3 global accounting firms to do these assessments. So we do that per standard UN guidelines. They do an assessment of the partner's capacity. And based on that assessment, we decide whether or not we can do that. Now, if they don't have the fiduciary capacity, then what the GEF will say to us or any agency is, well, then find another partner. But still, they don't want us doing it. And it doesn't have to be a country government. It could be, heck, it could be UNDP. It could be any other agency, as long as it's not us. That's their, it could be an NGO. It could be, they would just say, find somebody else. If we can make the case that, gosh, we really couldn't find anybody else, they might accept that, but they're being pretty strict about it. The head of programming at the JEF told me he could think of only 4 or 5 countries worldwide where it would be justified not to have national execution. You know, countries in crisis. But
thank you. And the last question is from Serena.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeff. And actually, I think part of the question has already been answered because it was a bit of a, again, on this national execution versus implementation agency, and a bit you already answered. So I was just wondering if we really had to follow this trend of having 95% of external execution. A bit probably it's important for us as an organization to expand a bit what is the comparative advantage of a FAO if we just have to focus on being implementing agency. So what was the comparative advantages versus World Bank or UNDP, which we really know that actually they have a long experience of being implementing agency for JEF or for other initiatives. So it's a bit on this line.
I think we will have to have that discussion. I think that we can have a national execution modality that still ensures support roles for FAO when required on the execution side, but it's still, the title is national execution. It's a modality of an execution. It's just the question becomes what degree of it is required or is justifiable in this place. But again, FAO's technical advice and involvement doesn't change so much there, especially at the national level. If it's a global project, then yes, and it's based in Forest Department, that's a different matter. But if it's a national project in Myanmar focused on forest management, what is FAO's technical added value at the country level anyway? We don't have technical officers there, per se. They're coming in from Bangkok or headquarters, and they come in, they're not being funded by the project budget anyway. They're funded by the fee. So, you know, again, we can have a project in Myanmar managed by another institution, and still our technical support proceeds as per normal. So, but yes, we need to have that discussion, and I'm sure we will.
Jeff, isn't there also something about up to 15% can be direct execution even when it's external execution? So up to 15% of the value can actually be done by the implementing agency, even when there's another executing agency. At least there was something that they did within UN Environment where they worked through partners for all of it. But there was a cap on the JEF saying you could do 15% by the implementing agency.
I'm not aware of that. I'll have to look into that. Yeah, that might be something, I've never heard of that, a cap on.
Okay, I think we've come to the end of our session. Thank you very, very much again for making yourself available and for providing us with all this information. And I hope this was useful for all of you. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Dawei and Luigi for setting up this webinar. And of course, our colleagues Marco, Roberto for the filming and Christian for the logistical support. And before we close, this is not the last one of the webinars this year of the Technical Network. There are 2 more, and maybe Dawei, you can just let us know what's coming next.
There are 2 more planned for this year. One will be on youth, another will be on socio-economic survey. The data will be announced at least 1 week prior to the seminar, and stay tuned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's give one more big round of applause to Jeff.